Hello, I'm Lottie and welcome back to the Marketing Hustle Hot Takes. If you're new in these episodes, I've got James Hickson round for tea, who built Brand Hackers with me, and we get the chance to talk about some stuff we've been ruminating on. Today, we're going to talk through our obsession with Ben & Jerry's Activism and how much we want to be a brand like them. And we're going to try and discuss just what activism, that big old word, means in the context of brand building. We all know the struggle, spending time, budget and creativity on a campaign, only to wonder, will this actually land? Well, this is where Sticky Beak comes in. Sticky Beak is a game changer for consumer testing, which I'm so passionate about, helping you make your marketing more effective by getting real consumer feedback on your brand's campaigns and products quickly and affordably. So why Sticky Beak? You can get fast, reliable insights in 48 hours or less. Testing won't blow the budget. It costs hundreds, not thousands. You can reach your target audience globally. You can test everything from logos to taglines, messaging, creative, packaging, promotion, and more. And I really believe in marketing data-driven decisions, and you'll hear me wang on about the power of insights. So I'm very proud of this partnership. Visit stickybeak.co/marketing hustle to book a free 30-minute strategy call and discover how they can help. Plus, you get some free Sticky Beak credits to get you started, so well worth giving it a go. We had a really interesting start of a conversation a few weeks ago about Ben & Jerry's, and I think basically we're like, we both need to learn way more about this. What an amazing case study. And this has been a great impetus to go away and do some homework.
Absolutely, yes.
So this is paying off. So we wanted to sort of like find out, like, is this activism hot air? Is this brand, like, I guess we get so surrounded by chat about purpose and whether purpose really is a differentiator for customers, whether it's legitimate, how to build it within businesses. And I think that's what sort of inspired us on this like little ice cream quest we've been on. So I started off with some research to try and understand like the headline question, like, is Ben & Jerry's legitimately doing good?
Okay.
Or
yeah.
Are we just being marketed that?
Gotcha.
Because I feel like that was a good place to start. And I was pretty blown away by what I read in terms of the volume and depth of the work they're doing. And like a lot of these examples are US based for obvious reasons, but they've done some really powerful campaigning in St. Louis to close the workhouse jail, which like resulted in a bill being passed in 2020. So like this is way more than just an unpack activation. This is actually like legislative change.
Actually like making change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They distributed an Empower Mint ice cream to Congress members to urge action to repair the Voting Rights Bill in 2016. Like, this is really powerful stuff. And then in terms of the way they're structured internally, it felt equally convincing. So they have this dedicated activism team and a whole part of their org structure that's focused on, I suppose, like policy as opposed to anything to do with the product.
But that's what's really interesting, I think. We might come on to this, but like activism policy, that's like really like a key distinction as opposed to just purpose. It's like it's more than purpose. So purpose is like, oh, we want to help people. Whereas activism is more like, no, we want to help people. We're actually going to help people. We're going to affect change. And, you know, I guess most organizations probably think they're going to do that. But these guys are building a team to have it. I mean, they're
funding it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
funding the actual thing, but then
commitment.
having people who are actually there, which takes them really into an interesting space around what's the role of a brand, right? Because it's like...
you overstepping a line?
Yeah, exactly. And personally, I don't think so. I love what they do, but it's like, I think that's you know, how far can you go as a brand before you start becoming, you know, a political campaigning organisation? And I guess this is actually probably really interesting where Ben & Jerry's find themselves so often, is they've got a load of people who don't like what they campaign for, and they go, you just need to get back in your box, in your ice cream pint, and sort of shut up. Like, you're a brand, you know, give us nice products and be entertaining, but that's it.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, well, like, brands can do good in the world, and more than just kind of pay lip service, or more than just sort of do it because it's a 10% CSR pledge.
Yeah.
Have you read the book by the founders of Ben & Jerry?
No.
I read that I kind of like early on in my career. I was just trying to read like every business book, and it's quite interesting. It's read by Ben & Jerry, obviously, and the whole thing was started on activism. I mean, and that's the key with them, I think, is that from the very first ice cream shop, they had I can't remember exactly what the first sort of couple of campaigns were. But it was like they would have, I think it was something around voters, definitely. And I think they were like, come in and if you show your vote or something like that, you get a free pint of ice cream or whatever. But there was definitely something from the very early days. And that's just because Ben and Jerry basically were hippies. And so I think that's obviously going to help. But they obviously thought, like, we want to run a business, want to have a brand. But actually, I think we're always more interested in doing something impactful in the world. So it's almost like that's the first thing. It's like, do you see the brand as like, we're here primarily to sell products, but it'd be nice to do a bit of good, or we're here to do good. Products enable us to do good.
I think what's just struck me hearing you say that is that we see so many brands where the product is trying to do good. So it's a healthier alternative, or it's even like a revenue share model, that it's like very connected to the product. Ben and Jerry's are like, we just make really good ice cream. This isn't better for you.
And it's like the only thing in the ice cream that's kind of like got a connection to doing better is that the cool names. Yeah. Like they have really fun names that link to the campaigns, but that's kind of it.
But they're not all like, fish food is not like saving the fish food.
No.
Like,
that's a good
it's
point.
just, this tastes really good.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really refreshing about, and quite unusual about, that clarity. So you had this really nice framework that you made up, which is worth us spending a whole podcast episode talking about, that to do this well, you have to be brave, consistent and clear, which I think gives us a good structure. So like, what does brave mean?
Yeah, so I think brave is the most important one. It's also the hardest one. And I suppose brave sounds obvious. So of course you've got to be a bit brave, but I think, what I mean by that is you've really got to be ready to ruffle some feathers. You've got to be, willing to piss people off. Probably you've got to be willing and ready to receive abuse, both online and in person. Because
not just probably, like death. You have to welcome that and see that as like a success metric.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's kind of easy to stand for something to a certain extent. It's like, I believe in, certain rights or voting or whatever it might be. Of course, yeah. But like actually to sort of pin your colours to the mast and say, I don't just believe in that, but actually I'm staking my brand on this because, this might actually impact sales, but the cause is more important. So I think you need that bravery and that kind of force of mind in order to really actually make sure that it's not just a sort of a side commitment. So there's an element of just having that bravery around pissing people off. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing in terms of that bravery. I think the other thing is it goes against most people's natures. So one of the things I think the reason bravery is super important because it's not the natural state of people. So most people don't go around in life being really bold and brave and shouting about what they believe in and all this sort of thing, which I think is, and we live in the world mostly of founder-led brands, and so that's why a lot of brands don't have that kind of, whatever you want to call it, that big, bold, brave, shouty activism as part of what they do, because that's not who the founders are. They want to do good, but they'll do it in their kind of way, which is sort of relatively mild and relatively, I'm doing good, but I don't want to kind of alienate anyone. Because that's kind of how most people live. And I don't say that in a bad way, I just think it's true. I think it's why sometimes tone of voices can be quite bland, because they're just a reflection of how people tend to talk to each other. But actually, I don't think that's enough in the brand world if you want purpose and activism to be a big part of your identity. You have to say, so even if you're a founder who it isn't naturally massively outgoing and doing all this thing, you've got to say, but for this, I'm going to actually almost take on a new persona, or my brand is going to have this persona, and I'm going to kind of put myself out there, and that's going to feel really uncomfortable. So there's a bravery there as well, and just saying this is more important than me feeling a bit uncomfortable, or me feeling like I'm not necessarily being true to my day-to-day. Does that make sense?
That's a hugely vulnerable position.
Yeah.
I think it does. I said it trivially earlier, but I think it does come back to getting comfortable with like hate mail being a key metric. Like you have to optimize for a really Marmite view where there are some people who feel vitriolic against you, and that's an incredibly vulnerable position. I think the bravery is a need to be the impact of bravery is that you're incredibly polarizing. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why you're creating a really strong response from some people. You're also dividing your potential target market into those who are going to love you and to those that are going to hate you. And I think why that's such an uncomfortable commercial position for some people is to say I'm closing a door to 50% of my audience.
That's exactly it. And I think that's the bravery, is saying I'm literally going to cut off 50% of potential customers.
Yeah.
Now the chances are, if you didn't do that and you tried to please everyone, you'd end up with the same number of customers. It's just they wouldn't care as much about you.
Or way less.
Potentially way less. But I guess if you're sitting there and you're in an investor meeting or a board meeting, or you're sitting there and going, God, we need more sales and you've got bills to pay, it's really hard to, that's again, real bravery to go, someone goes, look, maybe we should just try and be a little bit less outspoken about something because there might be some people, and you go, no, this is more important. That we've got to almost trust the process.
But I think it makes such good commercial sense, even if you put the value of activism to one side. So if you say, okay, I'm not worried about doing good for the world, I just want to be loved by some people because my commercial strategy is to be like adored by my early adopters and have my early adopters tell other people about it and have a level of loyalty and engagement that is going to way exceed like taking a generic stand to a mass market. And that makes like this isn't frivolous. It makes real commercial sense. You have better loyalty. You can command a price premium. Like Ben & Jerry's is not the most expensive, like they're not the cheapest ice cream in the fridge, and it can do that because it does that, because it has that like Marmite view of its audience. Yeah. I think the other thing that's so interesting about the impact of their bravery is that it's such an unusual case of a brand whose target market has a political view. So imagine if I presented a slide and was like, this is my target customer. They vote Lib Dem.
Yeah.
Like whatever. You'd be like, that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
Like in all takes of like demographic segmentation, their political leaning is seen as like a bit unpalatable. And I really fucked up once at Elizabeth Scarlett, where I ran a customer like insight survey, and I must have just gone on ChatGPT and been like, what are 10 good questions to understand someone? And one of them was, who do you vote for? And the customer database went mental.
They just didn't want to be asked.
They were like, that is so inappropriate. Like, you sell cushions. Like, what does my political leaning have anything to do with this? And I, massively had to put my hands up and go, like, I just really didn't think that through. That was just like a silly thing to do. But Ben & Jerry's have such a different approach on that. They go like, of course it matters what your politics are. Yeah. Because if your politics aren't aligned with us, we'll like vehemently disagree with you and we're public about that. And so that, I just think that's really refreshing and interesting, and means that you have such a, you're like so far beyond thinking about age or race or like,
it's the ultimate in terms
whether you go
of
to the gym at the weekend. It's like a true cross-section of society.
It's like psychographic, but taken to the extreme.
Exactly.
In a way, I know that Ben & Jerry's will do this in most of the markets they're in. They certainly do a lot of activism in the UK, but the American market is definitely where they do the most. If you look at without wanting to go sort of too deep into the politics in America over the last sort of probably 10 years especially has got very polarised, but also quite extreme. Particularly on the Trump side of things. Whereas we haven't had that quite so much in Europe and the UK. And I wonder if Ben & Jerry's has almost been a bit reactive and felt we can't actually stand for this, as opposed to having to sort of find causes. They're almost like, we just can't actually not react to this.
The causes are pretty like self. Yeah, but I think it comes back to the bravery point. I think loads of brands will have sit in boardrooms and felt that, and not have the balls to do it.
So one of the things on bravery, which I kind of wanted to touch on as well, is, and this is a really good point with Ben & Jerry's, is the whole team has to be brave, not just the founder team or the senior leadership team. So when you're, if you're a founder-led brand and you're sort of 10 of you, that's kind of easy. You hire people who have just believe in what you're doing. But once, Ben & Jerry's got probably, thousands of employees. Every single one of them pretty much has to have the bravery. Maybe not every single one, but everyone's got to believe in what they're doing and be like, I'm into this, and I'm going to be brave enough because I'm also going to put my head on the line, even though I might just be a marketing exec or whatever it might be, but also then have the bravery, like say, to take on these issues, and to embed that in the organisation must be really hard to do. I think that's one of the most impressive things is that they're doing it 40, maybe 45 years after their founding. They're still doing this stuff.
I think that brings us really nicely onto your the second point of your framework around consistency, which is sort of what you're saying. And I actually feel so privileged. We had a Big Up Club. So Big Up Club is our community for marketing directors. We had a talk from Arundhata Chugh, who was CMO of Ben & Jerry's, and then MD of Pucker Tea. I'm probably going to misquote her CV, but like a phenomenal woman who came in to talk a lot about this. And she was, I mean, so candid about what has to happen behind the scenes for that to be possible,
right?
And how you manage a business both at Pucker and at Ben & Jerry's to do that. And consistency is like totally key. So at Pucker Tea, they invented all their own cultural standards. So they were like, fair trade doesn't do quite what we need it to do. Rainforest Alliance doesn't do quite what needed. So they created their own structure called Fair Wild that was their own standards to ensure that consistency was integrated from supply chain to end interaction with the customer, which I just think is an amazing example of like what it takes to do that. What I found kind of the most powerful about the way she talked about managing P&Ls in cultures where activism was so important and doing good was so important was that the line wasn't, everyone believes in this and therefore that money is sacrosanct, which is kind of what I was expecting.
And is that money, is that a separate kind of fund?
No, so sort of, but her sort of headline was, my business had to make profit, otherwise questions were going to be asked.
Gotcha, okay.
And that she knew that it wasn't sacrosanct, despite all the best intention and all the cultural structures for it, that if there was too much pressure on the P&L, there would have to be hard questions asked.
That's so interesting.
Which is so interesting.
I think it's like, I completely understand the commercial imperative there, but part of me is like, a bit pissed off about that. Not with Pucker, it's fine. But like as in, I'm almost like, I mean, the reality is, unless you've got, very deep pockets, a big investor who doesn't mind not making money, whatever it might be, which most people don't have, of course, the only way you can do this stuff is by making profit. So of course you've got to do it. Actually, Innocent's an interesting one. When I worked there, they had this 10% of profits pledge, which went to the Innocent Foundation. And that was really good. And they were profitable for most years up until when Coke came in. And then when they were doing the Coke deal, they were really ramping up top line at the expense of bottom line. It meant there was no profit. So actually, I think it was maybe 2013, so just after the Coke deal had been done, they actually put in something that said 10% of profits or a minimum of 950,000 a year. Oh, that's cool, because that's like, now there's no excuse here. There's always going to be a benchmark. That money is going to them regardless. And that must have been quite a hard thing to do, but because that's 950 grand's a lot of money. And so I think I suppose they did just say, look, that's sacrosanct, even with a Coke ownership.
I think maybe they're not mutually exclusive. So maybe you do have a culture where these things are sacrosanct, but there's also an understanding that in order to respect that sacrosanct position and for that to not be a source of great tension, the business still has to be really commercially healthy. I think it's just like a very sensible leadership style to say, I'm going to make sure that we never have to ask these questions because I'm going to run a business to a point where we're like a way away from that ever having been the conversation. And in our tiny little world, we give 2% of our revenue away, like revenue, not profit, for exactly that reason. But there have absolutely been times where people in the business, like our accountants, my head of finance, have said like, are we sure about this? And I've had to ban the conversation. I have a very strong veto because in a similar way, that is sacrosanct in my head, but I still don't want to be questioned.
But actually, would you have that hard conversation if it was needed?
No. I'm like, do not ever ask me. Because I do trust myself to not waver on that, but I don't want that to be challenged. It's obviously a really strange parallel to talk about our management structure versus Ben & Jerry's. But this is the consistency is super interesting, and you've kind of touched upon it with Unilever in the context of their sale to Unilever. So in 2000, Ben & Jerry's was bought by Unilever, and like to the world, that's the end of everything.
100%.
That just feels like the most crazy death knell.
Yeah.
But the way that deal was structured has appeared, from everything I've read, to have successfully protected the Ben & Jerry's mission.
And do you know what, sort of without going into all the detail, do you know what a couple of things that were kind of significant from that? Like, is it around, is it around board structure? Is it, was there something that said,
so they maintained an independent board. And since then, they've done incredibly powerful stuff. So like in 2022, Ben & Jerry's actually sued Unilever for selling the ice cream business in Israel to a local licensee, which went against their stance on politics in the Middle East.
So they sued their own
They sued
parent.
their boss, yeah.
So this is like when you divorce your parents type thing. We're in real kind of reality TV mode here.
So that... Exactly. So for this like sitcom to have played out, the operational system has to have been in place, which I guess is a wider point about in any business. If the investors, if there is any question from where that first pound has come from through to the last person in the supply chain, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's such a good way of looking at it. A sort of fully end-to-end thing.
And we had that conversation with Holly Ricks from Thai Fu that I do think is a parallel here. So for anyone who doesn't know the story, Thai Fu, obviously like legacy British heritage brand, was in a bit of an interesting place. Got bought by a private equity company, I think, who put a team in to transform Thai Fu. And they did some incredible work on redefining their brand proposition.
Like the definition of being brave here as well. Yeah. That talk with Holly, which people should go and find and watch, but she's talking about them basically taking on both legacy tea brands, but also this weird and terrible and almost mafioso kind of supply chain of tea. And no one wants to kind of like basically pull the rug up and show what's underneath. Everyone's just like, keep quiet, no one talk about it. And they were like, no, we're going to talk about it, which is a really brave thing to do, just from a sort of personal point of view, from a brand point of view. Talking about pissing people off, you're not just pissing off consumers, which they're not in this sense, but like you are really shaking the hornet's nest with that. So like really good example of bravery. So anyway, that's what I'm saying.
So that was they created Fear-Free Tea, which was a stance against gender-based violence in the tea supply chain. And as you say, that's like going to the plantations and saying like the way they've been treating their female workers and sexual violence has to end, otherwise you're not going to buy their tea. And that's like the level of change involved in that is just phenomenal. And it's this amazing case study that sadly won't come to market because the brand has since changed hands. And I think again that's the opposite of the Unilever story.
Exactly. And
that's like if the ownership structure doesn't believe in what you're doing anymore, the whole thing has huge risk of falling apart.
And I think that's that consistency point is that, I mean, for a start, I guess Thai Fu didn't have that consistency because it wasn't like part of their, founding heritage. It's not like, oh, we've only ever existed to stop this gender-based violence in the tea supply chain. So it was an add-on. It was a really, really worthwhile add-on, but it was an add-on. And the problem with that was there was no consistency to fall back on to say, look at the last 40 years of sales. Aren't they great because we've been purpose-led? That didn't exist because they'd never done it. And then there was no foundation in the organisation. Although Holly did actually say that a big part of what they were doing was everyone who was involved from an investor level through to employee level had to be bought into what they were doing. That was a really big thing. It was like, you're either with us or you're against us on this. And so they were trying to embed it they just didn't have the time in the end. But it's an interesting one of like, can you sort of almost retrofit purpose and impact into a brand? Probably, but they probably need to be in a really good commercial point. So going back to your point, as soon as the shit hits the fan, actually, we don't really want to do that purpose stuff. Let's go and do another, campaign that looks like one we did in the 90s sort of thing. Straight out the window, which is a real shame.
So our final point is around clarity. I don't know, I'm kind of torn on this because actually when you think about the stuff that Ben & Jerry's do, it is clear, I suppose it's clear and it comes back to a single brand thread, but it is very varied. They're fighting on lots of fronts.
Yeah, and this was the one thing I wasn't sure about. So when I was kind of doing clarity, I was thinking, yes, but they're talking about politics here, LGBTQ rights here, something else over here. I do think there's a common thread though, which I think for Ben & Jerry's is all around rights, human rights, that kind of focus. Now, they probably do bits and pieces around sustainability. I haven't looked at every single one of their campaign, but I reckon if you were to try and single one thing out, it'd be that. If you were to take Patagonia, it would be the environment and sustainability. That one's really clear. if you take Innocent, and we pretty should get some better, some more examples. But and actually, Innocent's an interesting one where it's not as clear now as it used to be. So when I was working there, it was all around improving the lives of people in the regions where they bought their fruit. So there was a really clear connection because that tended to be regions that needed, a lot of help. So they set up the foundation, they'd donate money to the foundation, and that would donate money to NGOs working in, Africa or South America and places like that, and in communities where they were buying their fruit. Mangoes, they bought loads of mangoes from India, so they did lots of work in there. That felt quite clear, but then you've got other bits and pieces they do. So the Big Nip, which is an amazing campaign, but that's all around helping elderly people in the UK. So I don't think it matters, it still works, but I do wonder if a bit of clarity, like anything in branding, being really clear on what you stand for, who you are, what you're against, what you're not for. I don't know. This is probably the most sort of contentious one of the framework.
Well, it feels hugely empowered by scale. So Ben and Jerry's they hadn't done above the line for a long time, and I think I'm just fact checking myself here. I think it was 2024. They launched their first above the line campaign for a long time, and the tagline was "Make some mother chunkin' change," and the creative is like make change with a puppet, make change with a little library, make change with a quilt. Like they have elevated their brand platform to like just do something, which becomes this umbrella for we're doing loads of stuff.
And what do you think about that? I mean, obviously, great they're doing it, but
I think they've absolutely earned the right to talk at that level.
Okay.
I think it's, if you say that's where Ben and Jerry's are, and if we use Ocean Saver as my like out the gates example, I think there's a huge distinction in terms of, the scale in which your brand can communicate, and there's a credibility, right, to Ben and Jerry's saying, just do something. We do a lot, and we're here. We're the ice cream brand for people who do stuff. So be someone who does stuff.
Yeah.
But that is a big brand play.
So going back to the sort of brands that we probably work with and potentially listening and watching this, they probably do need to be more clear and concise, right?
Yeah, I really think so.
I think so.
And I think the Thai Fu work on Fear-Free Tea was a really great, like a best-in-class case study of how to do that. Be very single-minded about what your mission is. Be very clear in your communication of how you're delivering on that message and why that's fundamentally true and not just lip service. I think we're both quite inspired by the distinction between purpose integrated in product proposition and a brand that takes on activism. And like those are two different things.
Yes.
If we were going to launch an activism inspired startup, what have we taken away from this conversation that we would do?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So I think one of the things is we'd have to embed it from day zero that we're essentially here to make change.
Yeah.
And we just happen to have these products that are how we fund it. And it doesn't mean that probably 80% of your time will be taken on the products, selling them, marketing them, making them great, because you don't have a business without that. But actually the 20%, the activism, is the only reason you're there. And if that ever gets diluted in some way or gets moved out, then there's just no point in doing it. So I think the first thing is you just have to say that we are here to be an activist brand. I think that's quite different from we're here because we want to be a bit more sustainable. So like that's one thing, being really clear. And then linked to that is being clear about what. I think if you're starting a brand, don't try and be an activist for everything. Just choose something and be really clear about it. I think then I would also then say is if you're going to do it and you're going to start an activist brand, don't whisper. Like shout. And because otherwise there's no point in doing it because you won't stand out. And even if it feels uncomfortable, and which to be honest, if you're starting an activist brand, it probably won't feel uncomfortable. You probably are the sort of person who like was part of all the student commit, you know what I mean? Like,
question your life choices if it's making you feel nervous.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're probably, and so this probably is an easy fix, but like actually go and be an activist, and actually study how activists work. So look at, NGOs, look at, non-commercial activist groups and copy their playbooks because their playbooks aren't necessarily perfect, but they probably do work. Look at Greenpeace, look at Led by Donkeys. That's how you do activism really, really well and get reach. imagine you did that, but you were a brand. So like, I think like look at the playbooks for that. So that'd be the first thing, I guess.
Yeah, your references are totally different. I think my sort of final thought on that would be have the commercial model tight from day one. And so that means that you have a much smaller target addressable market than the alternative brand in your space. You are really intentionally tracking those who love you and those who don't like you. So your brand health metrics are not, net promoter score. Are we kind of broadly okay?
Or even people who just like know about you. It's like, no, people know about you, but what do they think of
exactly.
you?
Exactly. So all of your tracking is around diehard fans, and you have an assumption around higher lifetime value for those diehard fans. And then your ownership structure has to be able to empower this. Like, this can't work if there is any tension with where that funding is coming from. I think it does all start and end with the money.
And to the point that you think when you're raising that money, you can't have any doubts about its provenance, as it were. So like, go to your local dentist who's got a bit of money to put in, great, he's probably a good guy. Go to your VC firm, you're like, I need to know everything about your books.
I think you need to be incredibly careful with ownership.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Because I fundamentally think if there's misalignment at ownership level, this is just destined to fail. If it's got to start there in order to end up somewhere compelling.
How do you think activism, if we're going to call it that kind of activism brand, play with retailers? Because I think on the plus side, they'll go, this is great because you're getting awareness and you're getting people to love you, and that means they're more likely to come in and buy your product, and we really like that you're standing out and all this kind of thing. On the flip side, they might be like, kind of some of the stuff you're talking about is maybe a little bit close to the bone. We've got this over there and this over there. Like, do you think, again, I don't think it's a reason not to do it, but do you think it's a consideration to take into account?
But I think what is really interesting about that brand in this context is that all the activism, like it's close to all the mission stuff is like one kind of big thumbnail scratch under the surface. Like, it's not buried at all. It's on the inside wrapper. It's like beautifully laid out on their website. But the point of sale is communicating really good, tasty chocolate. And it's like a discovery narrative around like why they exist. And I think why that's important is it feels like a sort of recognition from the brand and the industry that you've got to sell loads of tasty chocolate, full stop. You've got to be commercially productive for the retailer. You're not going to maintain that space on shelf because Tesco's are passionate about your cause. Fundamentally, it has to be commercially viable first, which I think comes back to that point around like how Ben & Jerry's was managed, which was to say commercial health is non-negotiable because that's what protects the non-negotiable status for activism.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that like in terms of like your setup, when whether you're early or whether you're a few years in, you'd almost want to just have that sort of church and state where someone is the activist lead, but then someone is the business lead. And I don't know what the split in terms of, decision-making power is, but it's like Tony's, wouldn't have worked if all they cared about was activism, because like I say, they might not have focused on the quality of the chocolate or the commercial relationships or all that kind of thing. It's kind of amazing that Ben & Jerry's, who were both just hippies, managed to get this business to where it was. At some point, and it must have been some point fairly early on, they must have brought in a proper kind of commercial head. Yeah. And just been like, we'll do all the cool shit. Just make sure we get listings and, and we don't sort of fuck any of that stuff up. So,
well, that's homework for another night. I think we need to go deep into the founding story.
Yeah.
Great.
I'll lend you my book.
Thanks very much.
Good to chat.
Good to chat.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favour and follow us wherever you listen to your podcast, because it makes such a massive difference. The next thing you can do is drop me a DM on LinkedIn and let me know what you think and what you would like more of. I've got lots of ideas in the future for where the marketing hustle can go, but I really want it to be led by you guys. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate you coming to join us for our chat. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Sticky Beak, who have been so generous with an offer of some free credits and a 30-minute consultation. The link is in the bio, stickybeak.co/marketing hustle. Their kindness means that we can make this show happen. So it's fantastic if you go and explore what they do.